The dust-coated stagecoach rattled to a stop outside the small town of Redemption, Texas, carrying Josephine O'Malley and the tattered remains of her hopes for a new beginning. It was the summer of 1875, and after 3 weeks of grueling travel from Boston, she had finally arrived at her destination, the place where she was meant to meet the man whose letters had promised her a life of comfort and respect as his wife. Josephine stepped down from the coach, her navy traveling dress wrinkled from the journey, her gloved hands clutching a small valise containing everything she owned in the world. At 22 years of age, with no family left in Boston after her father's passing, and the factory where she worked closing its doors, answering Mr. Edwin Porter's advertisement for a bride had seemed the only sensible choice. "You must be Miss O'Malley," called a thin, balding man in a suit that had seen better days. "I'm Frederick Toombs, Mr. Porter's business associate. I'm afraid I have some rather unfortunate news." Josephine's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "Where is Mr. Porter?" "I sent a telegram informing him of my arrival date." Toombs cleared his throat, glancing around the dusty street as if hoping for an escape. "Yes, well, you see, Mr. Porter has since married another, a local widow with considerable property. The situation developed rather quickly, I'm afraid, after your correspondence was already well established." "Married another," Josephine repeated, her voice barely above a whisper as the implications settled over her like a shroud. "But I've traveled nearly 2,000 miles. I've spent my last dollars on this journey." "Most regrettable," Toombs said with artificial sympathy. "Mr. Porter sends his apologies and has authorized me to provide you with funds for a return journey." "Return to what?" Josephine asked, the weight of her situation crushing down upon her. Her father's debts had claimed their modest home. She had no job, no connections left in Boston. "Is everything all right here?" The deep voice came from behind Josephine. She turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dusty riding clothes and well-worn boots marked him as a working man, but there was something in his bearing that commanded attention. "This is a private matter," Toombs replied curtly. The stranger's eyes, a striking blue that reminded Josephine of clear summer skies, studied her face for a moment. "Seems to me the lady might need assistance." "I'm quite fine, thank you," Josephine said automatically, though she was anything but. "Miss O'Malley came as a mail-order bride for Edwin Porter," Toombs explained with obvious discomfort. "Unfortunately, Mr. Porter's circumstances have changed." "He married someone else," Josephine clarified, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The stranger's jaw tightened. "Porter did that, did he?" He removed his hat, revealing thick waves of brown hair. "I'm Wade Sullivan, madam. Own the Broken Spur Ranch just outside of town." He turned his attention back to Toombs. "So Porter's already taken himself a wife after sending for this lady?" "Yes. Well, these things happen," Toombs replied dismissively. "I'm simply trying to arrange for Miss O'Malley's return journey." Wade Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "Then she's free to choose me." The words hung in the air like the first clap of thunder before a storm. "I beg your pardon," Josephine found her voice. Wade Sullivan met her gaze directly. "If Porter's fool enough to make promises he won't keep, then you're free to consider other offers." "I'm in need of a wife to help run my ranch. It's not a palace, but it's a good, honest living." "Mr. Sullivan," Josephine began, stunned by this unexpected turn, "you don't even know me." "I know you had the courage to travel across the country on the promise of a better life," he replied. "That tells me something about your character, Miss O'Malley. The rest, I reckon we can figure out along the way." Toombs cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular," So is leaving a woman stranded after promising her marriage, Wade cut in. His tone softened as he addressed Josephine. I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just offering you another option. You can stay at Mrs. Grayson's boarding house tonight on my account and think it over. Josephine regarded him carefully. There was something compelling about his directness, about the quiet confidence with which he spoke. But she hadn't come all this way to simply transfer herself from one unknown man to another. Why would you make such an offer to a complete stranger? She asked. A slight smile touched Wade's lips. Because I've been looking for someone with spirit enough to start fresh in a tough land. From the look in your eyes right now, I'd say you've got that in spades. And if I decline, Josephine asked, then I'll still pay for your room at the boarding house while you figure out your next move, Wade replied without hesitation. No strings attached. Josephine considered her limited options. She had some pride left, despite everything, and she wasn't about to marry the first man who offered after her humiliating rejection. But she needed time to think, and a safe place to do it. I'll accept your offer of lodging for tonight, Mr. Sullivan, she said finally. As for the rest, I'll need time to consider. Wade nodded, seeming neither disappointed nor surprised. Fair enough. He gestured toward a modest building down the street. Mrs. Grayson runs a respectable establishment. I'll walk you over. As they left a sputtering Tombs behind, Josephine felt the stares of townsfolk following them down the street. Her planned future had disintegrated in a matter of minutes, yet somehow she felt strangely unburdened. Perhaps it was the shock, or perhaps it was the unexpected appearance of this straightforward rancher who spoke to her, as if she had choices when she'd felt completely trapped. Either way, as the sun beat down on the dusty street of redemption, Josephine knew one thing for certain: her story in the West was only just beginning. Mrs. Grayson proved to be a kindly widow in her 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. After Wade explained the situation in mercifully vague terms that preserved Josephine's dignity, the older woman showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor of the boarding house. You must be exhausted, dear, Mrs. Grayson said, lighting a lamp as the evening shadows grew longer. I'll bring up some supper shortly. A good night's rest will help clear your mind. Thank you, Josephine replied, sinking onto the edge of the narrow bed. I confess I'm feeling rather overwhelmed. Mrs. Grayson's expression softened. You wouldn't be the first girl to come west on promises that didn't pan out. But you've got grit, I can see it in your eyes. After the woman left, Josephine unpacked her meager belongings, including the letters from Edwin Porter that had convinced her to make this journey. The flowery promises of a comfortable home and a respectable position as the wife of a businessman now rang hollow. She tossed them onto the small desk by the window. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Grayson with a tray bearing a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a cup of coffee. Mr. Sullivan asked me to give you this as well, she added, placing a small envelope beside the tray. Once alone again, Josephine opened the envelope to find a brief note written in a surprisingly neat hand. Miss O'Malley, I understand you need time to consider your situation. I'll come by tomorrow at noon if you're willing to talk further. No pressure. Just conversation. Wade Sullivan. Below the note was a small stack of dollar bills, enough to secure her room for at least a week, or to purchase a stage ticket to the nearest large city. Josephine stared at the money, conflicted. On one hand, she didn't want charity. On the other, she recognized the practical necessity of her situation. She set the money aside and turned to her meal, realizing how hungry she was after the day's events. As she ate by lamplight, Josephine gazed out the window at the town of Redemption. It wasn't what she'd pictured during those long nights in Boston when she'd read Porter's letters and imagined her new life. The buildings were more weathered, the streets dustier, the whole place smaller than she'd envisioned. Yet there was something honest about its rough edges that appealed to her more than Porter's too smooth promises. Morning brought renewed clarity. Josephine dressed in her best dress, a modest blue cotton with white trim, and made her way downstairs, where she found Mrs. Grayson preparing breakfast for her boarders. "There's coffee on the stove, dear," the older woman called, "and eggs coming right up." Josephine settled at the table, nodding politely to the other boarders, two traveling salesmen and an elderly gentleman who tipped his hat, before returning to his newspaper. She was finishing her breakfast when the front door opened, admitting a young woman about her own age, dressed in a fashion that seemed almost ostentatious for the early hour. "Miranda," Mrs. Grayson greeted, though Josephine detected a slight coolness in her tone. "What brings you by so early?" "Just being neighborly," the woman replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She turned to Josephine. "You must be the Eastern girl who came for Edwin Porter." Josephine straightened her spine. "I'm Josephine O'Malley, yes." "Miranda Porter," the woman said, and Josephine felt as though she'd been doused with cold water. "Edwin's wife." The dining room fell silent as the other boarders suddenly became very interested in their meals. "I see," Josephine managed, keeping her voice level. "Congratulations on your marriage." Miranda Porter's smile sharpened. "Thank you. I just wanted to meet the woman my husband was corresponding with. Edwin told me all about it, of course. Such a misunderstanding." "Was it?" Josephine asked, unable to keep a hint of steel from her voice. "Well, of course. Edwin never intended for things to progress so far with your letters. He was merely being polite." Miranda adjusted a gold bracelet on her wrist. "We've been sweethearts since childhood, you see. Our marriage was always going to happen once my late husband's affairs were settled." Mrs. Grayson intervened before Josephine could respond. "Miranda, I'm sure you didn't come all this way just to clear up a misunderstanding." Miranda's eyes glittered. "Actually, I also came to offer Miss O'Malley a position. My household needs a new maid, and since she's already traveled all this way." The insult was so blatant that Josephine nearly laughed. Instead, she calmly set down her coffee cup. "How thoughtful of you, Mrs. Porter, but I believe I have other prospects to consider." "Oh." Miranda's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "I heard Wade Sullivan offered to make you his wife. Rather impulsive of him, wouldn't you say? Wade's a bit rough around the edges, hardworking, certainly, but hardly the sort a refined Eastern lady would consider." "I find honesty refreshing," Josephine replied coolly. Miranda's smile tightened. "Well, should you change your mind about the maid position, do let me know. It would be so much more appropriate than rushing into another hasty arrangement." After Miranda departed in a cloud of expensive perfume, Mrs. Grayson placed a comforting hand on Josephine's shoulder. "Don't mind her. Miranda Blackwell Porter now, I suppose, has always thought herself above the rest of us because her daddy owned the bank before he lost it gambling." "Is that why she married her first husband?" Josephine asked. Mrs. Grayson nodded. "Old Mr. Jenkins was 30 years her senior but had money. He passed last year." She hesitated. "As for Wade Sullivan, he's a good man, works harder than anyone I know, built that ranch from nothing." "You think I should accept his offer?" Josephine observed. "I think you should talk to him," Mrs. Grayson replied carefully. "In this country, a woman needs either money of her own or a good partner. Wade Sullivan would be the latter." When noon arrived, Josephine was waiting on the boarding house porch, having spent the morning considering her limited options. The spring air was warm, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She watched as Wade Sullivan rode up on a handsome chestnut horse, dismounting with the easy grace of a man accustomed to life in the saddle. "Miss O'Malley," he greeted. removing his hat. In the full light of day, she could see his features more clearly: strong jawline, straight nose, those striking blue eyes set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't conventionally handsome like the Boston men she'd known, but there was an honest appeal to him. "Mr. Sullivan," she returned his greeting. "Thank you for the funds you left. It was very generous." It seemed the right thing to do. He gestured toward the street. "I thought we might walk a bit if you're amenable. Easier to talk without the whole town listening in." As they strolled down Redemption's main street, Josephine became aware of curious glances from townspeople. News traveled fast in small communities, and she had no doubt that everyone knew her situation by now. "I met Mrs. Porter this morning," she said, breaking the silence. Wade's expression darkened. "Did you now? I imagine that was interesting. She offered me a position as her maid," Josephine said with a wry smile. Wade actually stopped walking. "The nerve of that woman," he muttered. Then, seeming to catch himself, he added more carefully, "I hope you declined." "I did, though I'm not entirely sure what I'll do instead." Josephine looked directly at him. "Your offer yesterday was unexpected, Mr. Sullivan. And while I appreciate the gesture, I can't help wondering about your motives." Wade nodded slowly, as if he'd anticipated the question. "Fair enough. The simple truth is I need a wife. I've built a decent ranch, 500 acres, good cattle stock, a solid house, but it's no life for a man alone." He paused. "I've been thinking about advertising for a mail-order bride myself. Then you arrived, already here and needing a new situation." "So I'm convenient," Josephine stated. "You're available," Wade corrected. "And from what little I've seen, you've got spirit and dignity. Those are rare qualities." They had reached the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open country. In the distance, Josephine could see rolling hills and patches of woodland under a vast blue sky. "What exactly would you expect of a wife?" she asked, the practical question that had been foremost in her mind. "Partnership," Wade answered promptly. "The ranch needs a woman's touch and management inside the house. I need someone who can keep accounts, help with correspondence, maybe eventually teach our children." He met her gaze directly. "As for the other aspects of marriage, I would expect fidelity and respect. I would offer the same. Affection might grow in time, but I wouldn't demand what isn't freely given." His straightforwardness was both refreshing and slightly embarrassing. Josephine felt her cheeks warm but maintained her composure. "And if we found we couldn't tolerate each other after all, then I'd make sure you had the means to establish yourself elsewhere," Wade said simply. "I'm not looking to trap anyone, Miss O'Malley." They turned back toward town, walking in companionable silence for a few moments. "Would you show me your ranch?" Josephine asked suddenly. "Before I make any decision, I'd like to see where I might be living." Surprise flickered across Wade's face, followed by a genuine smile that transformed his serious features. "I'd be happy to. Can you ride?" "It's been many years," Josephine admitted, "but yes." "Good. I'll arrange for horses tomorrow morning if that suits you." They parted at the boarding house with the agreement to meet at 8 the following day. As Josephine watched Wade walk away, she pondered the strange turn her life had taken. 24 hours ago, she'd been devastated by Porter's betrayal. Now she was seriously considering a marriage proposal from a man she barely knew. Yet something about Wade Sullivan's direct manner and clear-eyed honesty appealed to her far more than Edwin Porter's flowery letters ever had. There was no artifice to the rancher, no false promises, just the straightforward offer of a partnership that might, with time and effort, grow into something more. That evening, after a simple dinner at the boarding house, Josephine sat on the small balcony outside her room, watching twilight settle over Redemption. The sound of piano music drifted up from the saloon down the street, along with occasional bursts of laughter. This small frontier town was a world away from the crowded streets of Boston, yet she found herself strangely drawn to its openness, to the sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the very air. "Made any decisions?" Mrs. Grayson asked, joining her with 2 cups of tea. "I'm going to see Mr. Sullivan's ranch tomorrow," Josephine replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. Mrs. Grayson nodded approvingly. "Smart. Never buy a horse without seeing it run first." Josephine laughed despite herself. "I'm not sure Mr. Sullivan would appreciate the comparison." "Oh, he would," the older woman assured her. "Wade's practical to his bones. It's what's made him successful when others failed." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "His father was one of the first settlers here, built a small cabin on what's now the Broken Spur. Died when Wade was just 16, leaving him to care for his mother and younger sister." "He has family?" Josephine asked, surprised Wade hadn't mentioned them. "Had," Mrs. Grayson corrected gently. "His mother passed from fever 5 years back. His sister married a shopkeeper in Denver 2 years ago." She patted Josephine's hand. "Wade Sullivan knows loss, knows how to rebuild, makes him a good man to have beside you in this country." With those words echoing in her mind, Josephine retired for the night, trying to imagine what her life might be like as Mrs. Wade Sullivan. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but then again, nothing about her journey west had gone as expected. Perhaps that was the nature of the frontier, a place where plans gave way to adaptation, and survival depended on seizing unexpected opportunities. Morning brought clear skies and a fresh breeze that carried the promise of another warm day. Josephine dressed in her most practical outfit, a simple brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and braided her chestnut hair tightly. By 8 o'clock, she was waiting on the boarding house porch when Wade arrived with 2 horses. "Good morning, Miss O'Malley," he greeted, helping her mount a gentle-looking bay mare. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch. The trail's easy enough." As they rode out of town, Josephine felt the curious stares of Redemption's residents. No doubt her riding out with Wade Sullivan would be the subject of considerable gossip before the day was through. "Does it bother you?" she asked as they left the last buildings behind. "The talk," Wade glanced over at her. "Small towns run on gossip like engines run on coal. Can't stop it, so I don't much concern myself with it." The countryside opened up around them, rolling grassland dotted with mesquite trees and occasional stands of oak. In the distance, blue mountains shimmered against the horizon. Despite her uncertainty about the future, Josephine found herself breathing more deeply, enjoying the sense of space and freedom. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It can be harsh," Wade replied, though she caught the pride in his voice. "Drought years are brutal. Winters can be long. But there's something about this land that gets in your blood." They rode in companionable silence, Wade occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local history. He was surprisingly knowledgeable about the native plants and wildlife, and Josephine found herself genuinely interested in his explanations. "That's the north boundary of my property," he said eventually, indicating a fence line running along a gentle ridge. "The house is just beyond that stand of trees." As they crested the ridge, Josephine got her first view of the Broken Spur Ranch. The house was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of timber and native stone with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures. "You built all this?" she asked, impressed despite herself. "The original house was my father's cabin," Wade explained as they rode toward the main building. "I've added to it over the years. The barn and bunkhouse are new in the last 3 years. A young man emerged from the barn as they approached, hurrying over to take the horses. "Morning, boss," he called cheerfully. "Everything's quiet." "Miguel and Tom are checking the south fence line like you asked. Miss O'Malley, this is Daniel Cooper, one of my ranch hands," Wade introduced them. "Daniel, Miss Josephine O'Malley." The young man tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, how many people work here?" Josephine asked as Wade helped her dismount. "4 permanent hands," he replied. "We hire extra help during roundup and branding season." He led her toward the house, and Josephine noted the well-tended garden to one side and the neat pathway of flat stones leading to the porch steps. Someone had placed pots of bright wildflowers on either side of the front door, an unexpected touch of beauty that softened the frontier practicality of the place. "Mrs. Hernandez comes from town 3 times a week to cook and clean," Wade explained, noticing her interest in the flowers. "She has a way with growing things." The interior of the house was simply furnished but unexpectedly comfortable. The front door opened into a large main room with a stone fireplace and solid wooden furniture. Bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well stocked with volumes ranging from practical farming manuals to novels and poetry collections. "You read Emerson?" Josephine asked, surprised to spot a familiar volume. A hint of color touched Wade's tan cheeks. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She made sure I had an education, even out here." He showed her through the rest of the house a formal dining room, a study with a large desk, a spacious kitchen with modern iron cookstove, and upstairs, 4 bedrooms including a master chamber with attached dressing room. "The furniture was my mother's," Wade explained as they stood in the master bedroom. "It's seen better days, but it's solid. Of course, you'd be free to change things, make the place your own." The casual way he offered her authority over his home struck Josephine forcefully. Edwin Porter's letters had always emphasized how she would fit into his life, adapting to his preferences. Wade Sullivan, by contrast, seemed to be offering her a genuine partnership, a chance to create something together. Back downstairs, a middle-aged Hispanic woman had arrived and was preparing coffee in the kitchen. She greeted Josephine warmly before giving Wade a pointed look that made him clear his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Hernandez believes I've been living like a bachelor for too long," he explained after the woman bustled out. "She's not entirely wrong." They took their coffee onto the back porch, which overlooked a small apple orchard and, beyond it, the rolling grasslands where cattle grazed. The peaceful scene was a far cry from the crowded streets of Boston or even the dusty bustle of Redemption. "I know it's not what you came west expecting," Wade said after a comfortable silence. "And I know we're strangers still, but I think we could build a good life here, Miss O'Malley." Josephine studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. In just 2 days, Wade Sullivan had shown himself to be honest, hardworking, and surprisingly thoughtful. He'd offered her a solution to her predicament without making her feel like a charity case, and the home he'd built spoke volumes about his character. "I have conditions," she said finally. Wade's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded for her to continue. "First, I would need time. We would marry quickly for propriety's sake, but I would want us to truly know each other before." She faltered, then pushed on. "Before the marriage becomes a true one in all respects." "Agreed," Wade said promptly. "What else?" "I want to be a true partner. I have a good head for numbers and organization. I would expect to have a say in the running of the ranch, not just the household." This time Wade's lips curved into a smile. "I was hoping you'd say something like that. Running a ranch this size takes more than muscle. It takes planning and good management." "Lastly," Josephine continued, If this arrangement doesn't work, if after a reasonable time we find we can't make a true marriage of it, you'll provide me with enough funds to establish myself elsewhere, as you promised." "You have my word," Wade said solemnly, "and I'd put it in writing if you prefer." Josephine considered him for a long moment, weighing the risks against the possibilities. Then she set down her coffee cup and extended her hand. "Then, Mr. Sullivan, I accept your proposal." Wade's calloused hand enclosed hers, warm and strong. "I'll do my best to make sure you don't regret it, Miss O'Malley." For the first time since arriving in Redemption, Josephine felt a genuine sense of hope. This wasn't the future she'd imagined, but perhaps it would be better than the one she'd planned. The town of Redemption buzzed with excitement over the news that Wade Sullivan and Josephine O'Malley would be married the following Sunday. Mrs. Grayson helped spread the word that it wasn't a hasty arrangement, but rather a fortunate meeting of two people who had been corresponding, a small falsehood that preserved Josephine's dignity. And that Edwin Porter's marriage to Miranda had simply cleared the way for a more suitable match. "People will talk regardless," Mrs. Grayson told Josephine as she helped her alter one of her dresses for the ceremony. "Better to give them a story they can feel good about than let them make up something scandalous." Wade visited the boarding house each day, sometimes taking Josephine for walks around town, other times bringing her to the ranch to familiarize herself with what would soon be her home. With each meeting, Josephine found herself growing more comfortable in his company. Wade was direct in his speech and earnest in his attentions, never pretending their arrangement was anything but practical, yet showing genuine interest in her opinions and experiences. "Tell me about Boston," he encouraged during one of their walks. "What was your life like there?" Josephine described her childhood in a modest but respectable neighborhood, her father's work as a clerk in a shipping office, and her own employment at a textile factory after finishing school. "It wasn't an exciting life," she admitted, "but it was stable until my father died. The debts he left." She shook her head. "The factory closed the same month. It seemed like a sign that I needed to make a change." "Is that when you answered Porter's advertisement?" Wade asked. Josephine nodded. His letters painted such a picture of opportunity here. A growing town, his successful business. She gave a rueful smile. "I should have been more skeptical." "Porter has a way of making things sound better than they are," Wade said with a hint of grimness. "His successful business is a small general store that stays afloat mainly because his new wife had inheritance money." 3 days before the wedding, while Josephine was shopping for supplies at that very store, deliberately when she knew Porter would be out, Miranda Porter cornered her by the fabric bolts. "So you've decided to settle for Wade Sullivan," Miranda said, her voice pitched to carry to the other shoppers. "How practical of you." "I consider myself fortunate," Josephine replied evenly. "Mr. Sullivan is a good man." Miranda fingered an expensive length of silk. "Good, yes. Simple. Unrefined. But I suppose when one is desperate." She let the implication hang in the air. Josephine felt a flash of anger on Wade's behalf. "Mr. Sullivan has built something real with his own hands," she said, keeping her voice level. "That takes intelligence and character qualities I've come to value more than empty charm." Miranda's smile tightened. "Edwin and I were hoping you might stay in town. We still need a maid, and really, wouldn't that be more suitable for someone of your background? After all, what does a factory girl know about being a rancher's wife? About as much as a banker's spoiled daughter knows about genuine kindness," Josephine retorted before she could stop herself. Immediately, she regretted the sharp words, not because they weren't deserved, but because they lowered her to Miranda's level. Miranda's face flushed with anger. "You'll regret speaking to me that way. My husband and I have influence in this town." "And my future husband has earned respect," Josephine replied, gathering her purchases. "Good day, Mrs. Porter." She left the store with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly with the aftermath of the confrontation. She was so distracted that she nearly collided with Wade, who was approaching the store. "Josephine," he said, concern evident in his voice as he steadied her. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and despite her agitated state, she noted how naturally it sounded from his lips. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, I just had a rather unpleasant exchange with Mrs. Porter." Wade's expression darkened. "What did Miranda say?" Josephine hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "She suggested I should reconsider being a maid in her household rather than your wife." "The nerve of that woman," Wade muttered, echoing his reaction from days before. "Miranda Blackwell always did think the world existed to serve her purposes." "It doesn't matter," Josephine assured him. "I'm not concerned with her opinion." Wade studied her face for a moment. "Still, I'm sorry you had to face that. Some people in this town can be small-minded, and others can be surprisingly generous," Josephine countered, giving him a genuine smile. "Mrs. Grayson is hosting a small gathering for us after the wedding. She said it's tradition for a bride to be properly welcomed to the community." Wade looked momentarily uncomfortable. "You don't have to go through with this, you know." "If you've changed your mind, I haven't," Josephine interrupted firmly. "Unless you have." "No," Wade said quickly. "Not at all." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I just want to be sure you know what you're getting into, tying yourself to a rough rancher." "I believe I'm tying myself to a good man," Josephine replied simply. "The rest we'll figure out together." The Sunday of the wedding dawned clear and mild. Mrs. Grayson helped Josephine dress in her best gown, a pale blue silk that had been her mother's, carefully preserved and altered for the occasion. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a simple but elegant style, adorned with a small spray of wildflowers that one of the ranch hands had delivered that morning with Wade's compliments. The ceremony took place in Redemption's small church, attended by Mrs. Grayson, Wade's ranch hands, and a smattering of townspeople. Reverend Johnson kept the service brief but meaningful, speaking about partnership and mutual respect in terms that seemed particularly appropriate for their unique situation. When Wade slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he told her quietly and repeated his vows in a clear, steady voice. Josephine felt an unexpected surge of emotion. This wasn't the romantic culmination of a love match. Yet there was something profoundly moving about the sincerity in Wade's eyes as he promised to honor and cherish her. The gathering afterward at the boarding house was livelier than Josephine had expected. Mrs. Grayson had prepared a feast, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Josephine found herself welcomed warmly by most of the townspeople, many of whom seemed genuinely pleased that Wade Sullivan had finally taken a wife. "About time that boy settled down," declared an elderly rancher as he shook Wade's hand vigorously. "And you couldn't have found yourself a prettier bride." Josephine blushed at the compliment, especially when she caught Wade's eye and saw him nod in agreement. Edwin and Miranda Porter made a brief appearance, ostensibly to offer congratulations but primarily, Josephine suspected, to satisfy their curiosity. Edwin, a thin, nervous man with oiled hair and an overly elaborate waistcoat, barely met her eyes as he mumbled good wishes, while Miranda's smile was as cold as winter frost. "Such a charming, rustic celebration," Miranda commented, glancing dismissively around the boarding house parlor. "I'm sure you'll be very happy in your little ranch house." "Thank you, Mrs. Porter," Wade replied before Josephine could respond. We certainly will be, and we'd be delighted to have you and Edwin out to the Broken Spur sometime. It's been significantly expanded since you last saw it. Nearly twice the size of your father's old place before the bank took it, as I recall. Miranda's smile froze, and she tugged at her husband's arm. We really must be going, Edwin. So many social obligations tonight. After they departed, Josephine gave Wade a questioning look. That was rather pointed. Wade had the grace to look slightly abashed. Sorry, Miranda's father foreclosed on several struggling ranches during the drought years, including my father's original property. I bought it back acre by acre once I got established. He paused. I shouldn't have let her get under my skin on our wedding day. I think we're even then, Josephine said with a small smile. I may have implied she was a spoiled, unkind woman when she confronted me in the store. Wade's surprised laugh drew curious glances from nearby guests. I'd have paid good money to see that, he said, his blue eyes warm with appreciation. As the celebration continued into the evening, Josephine found herself genuinely enjoying the company of her new neighbors. Mrs. Hernandez, Wade's housekeeper, pulled her aside at one point to press a small package into her hands. Wedding gift, the woman said with a motherly smile. Special tea good for bride's nerves. Josephine thanked her, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture and the tacit acknowledgement of her unusual circumstance. As twilight settled over Redemption, Wade approached her where she stood catching her breath after a lively dance. Ready to head home? He asked quietly. It's a bit of a ride, and I don't want to tire you out completely. Home. The word sent a flutter of nervousness through Josephine's stomach. She was now Mrs. Wade Sullivan, and the Broken Spur was indeed her home. They said their goodbyes, accepting congratulations and good wishes from the assembled guests. Mrs. Grayson hugged Josephine tightly. You've made a good choice, the older woman whispered, and so has he. The ride to the ranch was mostly silent. The soft clop of hooves and the occasional nightbird call the only sounds breaking the evening stillness. Josephine was acutely aware of Wade riding beside her, his tall figure silhouetted against the deepening twilight. For all the time they'd spent together over the past week, this moment felt profoundly different. They were husband and wife now, bound by law and promise. The ranch house was lit up welcomingly when they arrived, lanterns glowing in the windows. Mrs. Hernandez had evidently come ahead to prepare the house for their return, and a small supper waited in the kitchen despite the food they'd already enjoyed at the celebration. She's been cooking for 3 days, Wade said with a fond shake of his head. Determined we won't starve during our first week of marriage. The mention of their marriage hung in the air between them, a reminder of all that remained undefined in their relationship. Wade cleared his throat. I've had the blue bedroom prepared for you, he said. I thought. That is, we agreed you'd want time. Thank you, Josephine said quietly, relieved and yet somehow disappointed at the same time. I appreciate your understanding. Wade nodded. Your trunks arrived from the boarding house this morning. Everything should be in your room. He hesitated. Would you like me to show you up? The house felt different now that she was here as its mistress rather than a visitor. As they climbed the stairs, Josephine was keenly aware of Wade's presence behind her, of the soft creak of his boots on the wooden steps. The blue bedroom was across the hall from the master chamber that would, presumably, someday be theirs together. Someone, Mrs. Hernandez, most likely had placed a vase of fresh wildflowers on the dresser and turned down the crisp sheets on the bed. Will you be comfortable here? Wade asked, remaining in the doorway. Yes, very much so, Josephine assured him. An awkward silence fell between them. Well then, Wade said finally. Good night, Josephine. Sleep well. Good night, Wade, she replied, his given name still unfamiliar on her tongue. After he'd gone, Josephine moved about the room, unpacking her few belongings and preparing for bed. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of starlit prairie stretching away toward the distant mountains. It was beautiful and intimidating at the same time, much like her new marriage. As she slipped into bed, Josephine reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this moment. She had come west seeking security and a fresh start, only to have her plans collapse upon arrival. Yet somehow, in just over a week, she had become the wife of a man who offered her not just security but respect and the promise of a true partnership. Wade Sullivan was still largely a mystery to her, but her instincts told her she could trust him. In time, perhaps their practical arrangement might grow into something more, something with the warmth and affection she'd secretly hoped for when she first decided to become a mail-order bride. For now, though, sleep beckoned, and tomorrow would be her first full day as mistress of the Broken Spur Ranch. The rhythm of life at the Broken Spur quickly absorbed Josephine into its steady flow. She rose early each morning, often finding Wade already gone to oversee the day's work with his men. Mrs. Hernandez arrived 3 days a week to cook and clean, but on other days, Josephine took charge of the household tasks, learning the peculiarities of the large iron cookstove and the best ways to preserve food in the dry climate. To her surprise, Wade had been entirely serious about wanting her help with the ranch's management. On her 3rd day as his wife, he showed her to the study and opened the leather-bound ledgers that tracked the ranch's finances. "My system's not very sophisticated," he admitted as she examined the neatly written columns of figures. "My father taught me basic bookkeeping, but I know there are better methods." Josephine, who had helped her own father with accounts for his small shipping clients, recognized the solid foundation of Wade's system, but also the places where improvements could be made. "This is actually quite well organized," she told him. "But I think we could implement a few changes that would make tracking profits and losses easier." The pleased look on Wade's face when she said, "We," gave Josephine a warm feeling of accomplishment. He listened attentively as she outlined her ideas, asking intelligent questions and offering insights about the ranch's operations that helped her understand the business better. By the end of her first week as Mrs. Sullivan, Josephine had reorganized the study, created a new accounting system, and begun cataloging the ranch's assets in a way that would make future planning easier. Wade seemed genuinely impressed with her work, and his appreciation bolstered her confidence. Their personal relationship developed more cautiously. They shared meals and evening conversations, gradually learning each other's histories and habits. Wade proved to be an attentive listener, genuinely interested in her stories of Boston and her perspectives on books they'd both read. For her part, Josephine found herself fascinated by his experiences building the ranch and his deep knowledge of the land and its ways. Physical contact between them remained limited to the occasional brush of hands when passing items at the dinner table, or Wade's steadying grip when he helped her mount her horse. Yet Josephine was increasingly aware of him as a man the breadth of his shoulders when he removed his jacket in the evening, the surprising gentleness of his calloused hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when something amused him. 2 weeks after their wedding, a sudden spring storm brought torrential rain that turned the ranch yard into a sea of mud. Wade returned to the house drenched and exhausted after spending hours helping the hands secure frightened cattle and repair a damaged fence. "You're soaked through," Josephine exclaimed when he stomped into the kitchen, water streaming from his hat and coat. "You'll catch your death. Let me draw you a hot bath." She bustled about, heating water on the stove while Wade peeled off his sodden outer garments. By the time the bath was ready in the small washroom off the kitchen, his teeth were chattering despite his efforts to hide his discomfort. "I've left towels for you," Josephine said, avoiding looking directly at him as she moved toward the door. "I'll have hot coffee waiting when you're done." "Thank you," Wade said, his voice rough with cold and fatigue. "You're a godsend, Josephine." The simple compliment warmed her as she returned to the kitchen to prepare a hearty meal. She had just set a pot of stew to simmer when she heard a crash from the washroom, followed by a muffled curse. "Wade," she called, hurrying to the door. "Are you all right?" "Fine," came the strained reply. "Just dropped the soap. Damn arm doesn't want to cooperate." Josephine hesitated, concerned. "May I come in?" A pause then. "If you're comfortable." She entered to find Wade sitting in the tub, his right arm held awkwardly across his chest. Even through the steam, she could see the angry red swelling around his shoulder. "You're injured," she said, instinctively moving closer. "Why didn't you say something?" "It's just a sprain," Wade replied, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his pain. "Got thrown against a fence post when a steer panicked." "Let me help," Josephine said decisively, rolling up her sleeves and reaching for the soap he dropped. "This is ridiculous. You can't even wash properly." If Wade was surprised by her practical approach, he didn't show it. He submitted to her ministrations as she carefully washed his back and injured arm, her touch gentle but efficient. Josephine kept her eyes averted from his more private areas, focusing on the task at hand despite the intimacy of the situation. "My father had rheumatism in his later years," she explained as she worked. "I often helped him bathe when the pain was bad." When she'd finished, she handed him a towel and stepped back. "Can you manage the rest?" "Yes," Wade said, his voice oddly husky. "Thank you, Josephine." She nodded briskly. "I'll find some liniment for that shoulder, and you'll need a sling." By the time Wade emerged from the washroom, dressed in dry clothes, Josephine had prepared hot coffee, set the table for their meal, and laid out bandages and a bottle of Dr. Peterson's miracle liniment that she'd found in the medicine cabinet. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a kitchen chair. "Let me see to that shoulder before we eat." Wade obeyed without argument, watching her face as she carefully applied the strong-smelling liniment to his injured shoulder and bound it with practiced hands. Her fingers worked surely, but she was intensely aware of the warmth of his skin beneath her touch, the solid strength of muscles even in their damaged state. "You're good at this," Wade observed. "I told you, my father, it's not just the bandaging," Wade interrupted gently. "It's how you take charge when needed, how you don't flinch from what needs doing." His blue eyes held hers. Most city women would have called for a servant or fainted at the thought of entering a washroom with a man in the tub. Josephine felt a blush rising in her cheeks. "Yes, well, I'm practical by nature, and we're married after all." "In name so far," Wade reminded her softly. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken possibilities. Then Josephine straightened, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "The stew will be ready. You need to eat and rest." That evening, as they sat before the fireplace in the main room, Josephine with her mending, Wade attempting to read despite his discomfort, she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking. 2 weeks of marriage had taught her much about Wade Sullivan's character. His integrity, his quiet intelligence, his occasional flashes of dry humor. What had begun as a practical arrangement was becoming something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name but could no longer deny. "You're staring," Wade said without looking up from his book. Josephine startled. "I was just wondering if you needed anything for the pain." Wade closed his book and met her gaze. "Josephine, I think we should talk." Her heart quickened. "About what?" "About us. This arrangement." He set the book aside. "You've been here 2 weeks now. Are you content with your decision?" "Yes," she answered honestly. "More than I expected to be." Relief flickered across Wade's features. "Good. I've been worried you might be regretting your choice." "Why would you think that?" Josephine asked, surprised. Wade shrugged his good shoulder. "You came west expecting to marry a businessman, live in town. Instead, you're miles from anywhere with a rancher who's gone before dawn most days and comes home covered in dust or worse." Josephine set aside her mending and looked at him directly. "Edwin Porter lured me west with empty promises and then discarded me when something more convenient came along. You offered me honesty and partnership when I had nowhere to turn." She paused. "I've never regretted accepting your proposal, Wade." In the firelight, his eyes seemed deeper blue than usual, intent on her face. "I'm glad, because I've found myself increasingly grateful that Porter was fool enough to let you go." The simple statement, delivered in Wade's straightforward manner, sent warmth spreading through Josephine's chest. "Well," she said, trying to keep her voice light, "his loss is your gain, I suppose." "My very great gain," Wade agreed seriously. They looked at each other across the space between their chairs, the air suddenly charged with awareness. Then Wade winced as he shifted his injured shoulder, breaking the moment. "You should rest," Josephine said, rising to her feet. "That injury won't heal if you don't give it proper care." Wade stood as well, towering over her in the firelit room. "You're probably right." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Thank you, Josephine, not just for today, but for everything since you arrived. You've already made the Broken Spur more of a home than it's been in years." Impulsively, Josephine stepped forward and placed a gentle kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Wade. I hope your shoulder feels better in the morning." His eyes widened slightly at the unexpected gesture, but he made no move to stop her as she gathered her mending and moved toward the stairs. "Good night," he called softly after her. In her bedroom, Josephine touched her fingers to her lips, surprised by her own boldness. It was only a kiss on the cheek, the most innocent of affections, yet it felt like a significant step in their evolving relationship. As she prepared for bed, Josephine acknowledged to herself what she had been reluctant to admit. She was developing genuine feelings for her practical, honorable husband. The question now was whether Wade Sullivan felt the same, or if her growing attachment would remain one-sided in what had begun as a marriage of convenience. Spring gave way to early summer, bringing longer days and the busy season of calving at the Broken Spur. Josephine adapted quickly to ranch life, learning to ride with greater confidence and even helping with some of the lighter ranch work when extra hands were needed. The account books flourished under her management, and Wade increasingly sought her input on business decisions. "I'm thinking of buying the Jenkins property that borders our east pasture," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. "It would give us access to the year-round spring there, make a big difference during dry years." Josephine considered the proposal. Over the past weeks, she'd come to understand the ranch's operations in detail. "It makes sense," she agreed. "But the asking price seems high from what you've told me." Wade nodded. "Old man Peters who's selling it thinks he can get top dollar because we need that water access." "What if we approached it differently?" Josephine suggested. "The Hendersons are looking to sell some of their cattle stock because their youngest son is going east to school. If we bought those cattle at a fair price, we could offer Peters a combination of cash and stock. He's been wanting to expand his herd." Wade stared at her for a moment, then broke into a broad smile. "That's brilliant, Josephine. Peters has been complaining about the quality of his breeding stock for years." He shook his head admiringly. "You've got a real head for this business." Josephine felt a flush of pleasure at his praise. "I enjoy it," she admitted. "It's satisfying, seeing how all the pieces fit together to make the ranch work." "We make a good team," Wade said, his voice warm in the gathering twilight. "We do," Josephine agreed, suddenly acutely aware of his proximity on the porch swing they shared. In the weeks since the incident with his injured shoulder, there had been a subtle shift in their relationship. Wade's touches lingered a bit longer when he helped her down from her horse. Their evening conversations stretched later into the night. They had developed a comfortable routine together, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of growing attraction that neither had openly acknowledged. "I've been thinking," Wade said after a moment of companionable silence, "about our arrangement." Josephine's heart quickened. "Oh, you've been here almost 2 months now." He turned to face her more directly, his expression serious in the fading light. "I promised you time, and I've tried to keep that promise, but I want you to know." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown beyond our practical agreement." The simple, honest declaration hung in the air between them. Josephine found herself suddenly breathless, both thrilled and nervous at the direction of their conversation. "When I offered marriage that day in town," Wade continued when she didn't immediately respond, "it was partly because you needed help and partly because I needed a wife to help run this place. But these weeks with you—" He reached out to take her hand. "Josephine, I'm falling in love with you. I think maybe I started that very first day when you stood in the street with your chin up despite everything that had happened." "Wade," Josephine managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. Our original agreement still holds. I won't press you for more than you're ready to give." Josephine looked down at their joined hands, as large and weathered from years of hard work, her smaller but developing calluses of her own from ranch life. "I've been thinking too," she admitted. "About us. About how different this has been from what I expected." Wade waited patiently as she gathered her thoughts. "When I came west, I thought I knew what I wanted," Josephine continued. "Security, respectability, a comfortable life with a man I might eventually come to care for." She met his eyes. "I never expected to find someone like you, someone who values my mind as much as my domestic skills, who treats me as a genuine partner." She took a deep breath. "I never expected to find myself falling in love with a rancher who proposed to me 5 minutes after we met." Wade's face transformed with hope. "Josephine, are you saying—" "I'm saying that I think it's time we considered ourselves truly married," she replied softly. "In all ways." The joy that lit Wade's features made him look suddenly younger, almost boyish despite his weathered features. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss against her palm that sent shivers up her arm. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice husky. "I don't want you to feel rushed." "I'm certain," Josephine assured him, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "I think perhaps I've been certain for weeks, but afraid to admit it to myself." Wade reached out to touch her cheek, his calloused fingertips infinitely gentle against her skin. "I never thought I'd be grateful to Edwin Porter for anything," he said with a wry smile, "but I thank God every day that he was fool enough to let you go." "Then she's free to choose me," Josephine quoted softly, echoing his words from that first day. "And I'm thanking my lucky stars that you did," Wade replied, leaning forward to kiss her properly for the first time. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers, the kiss beginning tentatively and growing in confidence as she responded. Josephine had been kissed before awkward, fumbling experiences with a boy from her neighborhood in Boston, but never like this. Never with this sense of rightness and belonging. When they finally drew apart, The first stars had appeared in the darkening sky above them. Wade's arm had found its way around her shoulders, drawing her against his side in a way that felt both protective and possessive. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said with a tenderness that made her heart skip, "would you do me the honor of sharing my room tonight?" "I would," Josephine replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I believe it's time I properly took up my duties as your wife." Wade's answering smile held both desire and deep affection. "Not duties," he corrected gently. "Never think of it that way. What's between us now is about wanting, not obligation." Later that night, in the master bedroom that was now truly theirs, Josephine discovered the truth of Wade's words. He was patient and considerate, guiding her through the initial awkwardness with tender humor and obvious devotion. What began as nervous anticipation transformed into something beautiful, a genuine joining of two people who had found in each other far more than they had initially sought. Afterward, lying in Wade's arms as moonlight streamed through the curtains, Josephine marveled at the strange path that had brought her to this moment of contentment. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked drowsily, his fingers tracing patterns along her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking about fate," she replied honestly, "about how the worst disappointment of my life led me to the greatest happiness." Wade pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Remind me to thank Porter properly someday." Josephine laughed softly. "I'm not sure he deserves the credit." "I think we made our own fate, you and I." "Maybe so," Wade agreed. "But whatever brought you to redemption that day, I'm grateful for it." His arms tightened around her. "Welcome home, Josephine Sullivan." In his embrace, with the vast Texas night surrounding their ranch house, Josephine felt the truth of those words down to her bones. She had come west seeking a home and a husband, and against all odds, she had found both along with a love she hadn't dared to hope for. The seasons turned, and life at the Broken Spur settled into a rhythm that suited both Wade and Josephine perfectly. By autumn, the ranch was thriving under their joint management. Wade's idea to acquire the Jenkins property, combined with Josephine's clever negotiation strategy, had secured them the valuable water rights that would sustain the ranch through future dry spells. Their cattle herd was growing, and Wade had begun to develop a reputation in the region for quality stock. Josephine bloomed in her role as Wade's wife and partner. Her natural organizational abilities transformed the ranch's operations, while her warm presence made the house a true home. She'd established a small vegetable garden that flourished under her care, learned to make soap and candles from Mrs. Hernandez, and even mastered the art of baking bread in the temperamental oven. More importantly, her relationship with Wade deepened with each passing day. What had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into a genuine love match. They worked well together, respected each other's strengths, and found in one another the perfect complement to their own natures. "I've been thinking," Wade said one evening in late October as they sat before the fire after dinner. Outside, the first cold snap of the season had brought frost to the pastures. "Christmas will be here before we know it." Josephine agreed, looking up from the shirt she was mending. "I should start planning. Mrs. Hernandez mentioned that the Hands usually expect a special dinner." "They do," Wade confirmed, "but I was thinking about something else." He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought perhaps we might invite your friend Mrs. Grayson from town. And maybe, I thought we might invite your sister to visit." Josephine stared at him in surprise. "My sister, Elizabeth, but she's in New York. We haven't spoken in years, not since she married against my father's wishes." "I know," Wade said gently. "You've mentioned her a few times." "It seems to me you miss her." Josephine set her sewing aside, touched by his thoughtfulness. I do miss her, but I don't even know where to find her exactly. The last letter I had was nearly 2 years ago. I took the liberty of making some inquiries, Wade admitted. I wrote to a business associate in New York last month, asked him to see if he could locate her. He reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope. This came on yesterday's stage. With trembling fingers, Josephine accepted the envelope. Inside was a brief note from Wade's associate confirming that Elizabeth O'Malley Bennett was indeed living in New York City, along with an address where she could be reached. "You did this for me?" Josephine asked, tears welling in her eyes. Wade moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You've given up so much to be here with me, your home, your city, everything familiar. I thought perhaps having your sister visit might ease the missing sometimes." Josephine leaned forward to kiss him fervently. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "This means more to me than I can say." Wade smiled, reaching up to brush a tear from her cheek. "Write to her. Invite her for Christmas or whenever she can manage the journey. The Broken Spur has plenty of room." That night, Josephine penned a long letter to her estranged sister, pouring out the story of her journey west, her disastrous arrival, and the unexpected happiness she'd found with Wade. She described the ranch, their life together, and extended a heartfelt invitation for Elizabeth to visit whenever possible. As autumn deepened toward winter, Josephine found herself experiencing occasional waves of nausea in the mornings and unusual fatigue by day's end. At first, she attributed it to the changing seasons and the busy pace of ranch life. But when the symptoms persisted into November, she began to suspect a different cause. She confided her suspicions to Mrs. Hernandez, who smiled knowingly and brewed her a special tea to settle her stomach. "A spring baby," the older woman predicted, patting Josephine's still flat abdomen. "Good timing. The busiest ranch work will be done before your time comes." Josephine waited another week to be certain before telling Wade. She chose an evening when they'd shared a particularly pleasant dinner, the fire crackling cheerfully in the grate as they relaxed in the main room afterward. "Wade," she began, setting aside the book she'd been pretending to read, "I have something important to tell you." He looked up from his ledger, his expression immediately concerned at her serious tone. "Is everything all right?" Josephine moved to sit beside him on the sofa, taking his hand in hers. "Everything is wonderful," she assured him, "but there's going to be a change at the Broken Spur come spring." She placed his palm against her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Wade's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he repeated, his voice suddenly hoarse. "You're certain?" Josephine nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears at the joy spreading across his face. "Mrs. Hernandez confirms it. Sometime in late April or early May, she thinks." "A baby," Wade said again, seeming unable to find other words. His hand spread protectively over her abdomen, and he suddenly pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Josephine, my God, I can't believe," he broke off, overcome with emotion. When he drew back, Josephine was startled to see tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A wife I adore, a child on the way. After my parents died, I figured the ranch would be legacy enough." "You'll be a wonderful father," Josephine told him, certain of this as she was of few other things in life. Wade kissed her tenderly. "And you're already an amazing wife and will be an incredible mother." His hand returned to her stomach. "A baby," he said again, wonder still evident in his voice. The news of Josephine's pregnancy seemed to make their home even warmer as winter settled over the Broken Spur. Wade became adorably protective, insisting she rest more and hiring a local girl to help with the heavier household tasks. The ranch hands, when told the news, reacted with genuine pleasure, and immediately set about treating Josephine as if she were made of delicate china. "I'm pregnant, not invalid," she protested laughingly to Daniel Cooper, Wade's foreman, when he refused to let her carry a basket of eggs from the henhouse. "Boss would have my hide if you strained yourself, madam," Daniel replied good-naturedly. "Besides, we're all looking forward to having a little Sullivan around the place." In early December, a letter arrived from Elizabeth. Josephine's hands shook as she broke the seal, nervous about what her sister might say after so many years of separation. The letter proved to be everything she could have hoped for: warm, affectionate, and full of joy at reconnecting. Elizabeth wrote of her life in New York with her husband James, a successful architect, and their 2 young children. She expressed heartfelt happiness about Josephine's marriage, and eagerly accepted the invitation to visit, though not for Christmas, as her children were still too small for such a long winter journey. Instead, she proposed coming in May, when travel would be easier. "May will be perfect," Wade said when Josephine shared the letter's contents. "The baby will be here by then. Elizabeth can meet her niece or nephew. You don't mind waiting so long for her visit?" Josephine asked. Wade smiled, pulling her close. "Honestly, I'm relieved. I want your full attention when our child arrives. There will be plenty of time for family visits afterward." Christmas at the Broken Spur was a joyous affair. Mrs. Grayson came from town to stay for 3 days, bringing gifts and gossip in equal measure. The ranch hands joined them for a magnificent dinner prepared by Mrs. Hernandez and Josephine, and afterward they gathered in the main room for music and storytelling. "Miranda Porter has been telling everyone in town that your marriage won't last 6 months, Mrs. Grayson confided to Josephine as they prepared dessert in the kitchen. "She'll be eating crow when news of the baby gets out." Josephine smiled, one hand resting on the slight swell of her abdomen. "I haven't seen the Porters since summer. Wade and I have been too busy with the ranch." "Well, they've seen you," Mrs. Grayson replied. "Or at least they've heard how successful the Broken Spur is becoming under your joint management. Edwin's store isn't doing so well. Miranda's spending habits are catching up to them, from what I hear." Josephine felt no pleasure at the Porters' difficulties, but couldn't help a small sense of satisfaction that she'd found such happiness after Edwin's callous treatment. "I hope they work things out," she said diplomatically. Mrs. Grayson patted her hand. "You're a better woman than I am, dear. But then, you always were special. Wade saw it right away, you know. The day you arrived, after he met you at the stage, he stopped by my boarding house to arrange your room, and I could tell something had shifted in him. He had a look I'd never seen before, like a man who'd glimpsed something precious and wasn't about to let it slip away." The winter months passed in a blur of preparation. Wade and the hands converted the bedroom next to the master chamber into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and crafting a beautiful wooden cradle. Mrs. Hernandez taught Josephine to make soft blankets and tiny garments, while Wade rode all the way to Fort Worth to purchase a rocking chair from an actual furniture store rather than relying on local carpentry. "It needs to be perfect," he insisted, when Josephine protested the expense. "You'll be spending hours in that chair with our child." As spring arrived, bringing new calves to the pastures and fresh green to the prairie, Josephine grew increasingly ready for her confinement to end. Her slender frame now carried a substantial bump, making movement awkward and sleep difficult. "Just a few more weeks," Wade would murmur each night as he rubbed her aching back and helped her find a comfortable position. April brought warm days and the sweet scent of wildflowers to the Broken Spur. Dr. Wilson from town began making weekly visits to check on Josephine's progress, assuring both her and Wade that everything was proceeding normally. First babies sometimes take their time, the doctor said during his visit in the 3rd week of April. But I wouldn't be surprised if yours decided to arrive early. The baby's already in position, and you've been having practice contractions for days. 2 nights later, Josephine woke just after midnight with a sharp pain that was unmistakably different from the practice contractions she'd experienced. She placed a hand on Wade's shoulder, gently shaking him awake. "Wade," she said calmly, "I think it's time to send for the doctor." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Wade sent Daniel riding for Dr. Wilson while Mrs. Hernandez, who had been staying in the house for the past week in anticipation of this moment, prepared the bedroom and set water to boil. By the time the doctor arrived, Josephine's labor was well established. Wade paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, wincing with each cry of pain from within, until Mrs. Hernandez emerged to firmly direct him downstairs. "No place for a man," she told him bluntly. "Go make coffee. This will take time." Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills when a new cry joined Josephine's, the thin, indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Wade, who had worn a path in the kitchen floor with his pacing, froze at the sound, his face a study in terrified joy. 10 minutes later, Dr. Wilson appeared at the top of the stairs, tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan," he called down. "You have a healthy son." Wade took the stairs 2 at a time, barely acknowledging the doctor's amused chuckle as he rushed past. In the bedroom, he found Josephine propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, cradling a small bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she'd made. "Wade," she whispered as he approached the bed cautiously, "come meet your son." With trembling hands, Wade accepted the tiny bundle, staring down in awe at the scrunched red face of his newborn child. The baby had a surprising amount of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, revealed a hint of blue that matched his father's. "He's perfect," Wade said, his voice thick with emotion. "Josephine, you're amazing. I can't believe," he broke off, overwhelmed. "Thank you for him, for everything." He carefully returned the baby to Josephine's arms and sat on the edge of the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other hand gently touching his son's cheek. "What shall we call him?" Josephine asked. Wade had been considering names for months, but suddenly knew with certainty. "William," he said, "after my father, William Joseph Sullivan." Josephine smiled tiredly. "William Joseph. It's perfect." She leaned against Wade's shoulder, her eyes drooping with exhaustion. "I love you, Wade Sullivan." "And I love you, Josephine Sullivan," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "More than I ever thought possible." As spring gave way to summer, William, quickly nicknamed Will, thrived under the doting attention of his parents. He proved to be an easy baby, with Wade's blue eyes and Josephine's auburn hair, and a temperament that mixed his father's steadiness with his mother's quick intelligence. In late May, as promised, Elizabeth arrived for a month-long visit, bringing joyful reunion and the chance for the sisters to rebuild their relationship after years apart. She fell instantly in love with her nephew and developed a warm rapport with Wade, who she declared was exactly the sort of man my sister deserves. "I still can't believe how this all happened," Elizabeth said one evening as the sisters sat on the porch, watching Wade show Elizabeth's husband James around the corral where a new breeding stallion was kept. Will slept peacefully in a basket between them. "You came west to marry one man and ended up with another the very same day," Josephine smiled, looking out over the ranch that had become her beloved home. "It wasn't quite that simple," she corrected gently. "Wade and I took time to know each other. But yes, sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. And to think, if Edwin Porter hadn't been such a scoundrel, you might have missed all this," Elizabeth marveled. Josephine reached down to adjust the blanket around her sleeping son. "Wade says we should send Porter a thank you note someday," she said with a laugh. "Have you seen the Porters since?" "Well, since everything happened," Elizabeth asked curiously. "Not often," Josephine admitted. "We cross paths in town occasionally." Miranda always makes a point of commenting on how rustic ranch life must be. "While secretly envying everything you have," Elizabeth observed shrewdly. Josephine shrugged. "Perhaps. They've had their struggles. Edwin's store isn't doing well from what I hear." "Well, I think it's marvelously fitting," Elizabeth declared. "The man who discarded you is struggling while you found true happiness. There's justice in that." "I don't wish them ill," Josephine said honestly, "but I am profoundly grateful for how things turned out." She watched as Wade laughed at something James said, his face lighting up in the way that still made her heart skip. "I came west looking for security and found love instead." As summer waned toward autumn once more, the Broken Spur Ranch continued to prosper under the Sullivan partnership. Wade's innovative breeding program was producing exceptional stock, while Josephine's management kept the business side running smoothly, even with a baby demanding much of her attention. On a golden September afternoon, nearly a year and a half after Josephine had first stepped down from the stagecoach in Redemption, she sat under an oak tree near the house, watching Wade play with 5-month-old Will on a blanket spread on the grass. The baby's delighted giggles rose into the warm air as his father lifted him high overhead, then brought him down for a noisy kiss on his chubby cheeks. Josephine's heart swelled with contentment as she observed the two most important people in her world. How strange and wonderful life could be, she mused. A single moment of heartbreak being told she'd been replaced, as Edwin Porter's bride had led directly to the greatest joy she could imagine. Wade caught her watching and smiled, the same warm smile that had first given her hope on that desperate day in Redemption. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Sullivan?" he called, settling Will against his shoulder as he walked toward her. "I'm thinking about fate," she replied, echoing words she'd spoken on their first night truly together. "And how thankful I am that mine brought me to you." Wade sat beside her, transferring their drowsy son to her arms. "Not just fate," he corrected gently, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Choice too. You chose to trust me when you had every reason not to trust any man. You chose to build this life with me." "The best choice I ever made," Josephine agreed, leaning into his embrace as Will drifted to sleep against her chest. Above them, the vast Texas sky stretched endlessly blue, promising more seasons, more years, more moments of the deep, abiding happiness they had found together. From an inauspicious beginning, a mail-order bride told she'd been replaced had grown a love story neither of them could have anticipated, but both now treasured beyond measure. "Then she's free to choose me," Wade had said that day in Redemption, offering a practical solution to her desperate situation. Neither of them could have known then how those simple words would transform both their lives, leading them to a happiness far greater than either had dared to dream.